Thank you, Ranking Member Keating. I now recognize Mr. Lawler from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Tomorrow, the House Foreign Affairs Committee is planning to mark up my bill, the IGO Anti-Boycott Act. While existing laws already disincentivizes other countries from boycotting Israel, this bill would disincentivize IGOs, like the UN and EU, from supporting BDS efforts. This is long overdue, and I look forward to moving this critical legislation through the committee. What does the BDS movement look like today in Europe and across other allied countries and IGOs around the world?
Sure. First of all, thank you for your efforts and for your bill. It's very important. As the person here today to kind of make the connection between what's happening and the anti-Semitic rise in terrorism, I just want to point out that an overwhelming number of entities in Europe that are the engines for BDS are fronts for terrorist organizations. If you look just, for example, at Samidoun, which I mentioned earlier, affiliated with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, if you look at some of the Hamas front organizations, what BDS has become is the public, legitimate face of anti-Israel activity. This is the way that you can engage in anti-Israel behavior and pretend that what you're doing is within the law. It's typically the public-facing side of what these entities and individuals are doing, and then there's other things that they're doing behind closed doors. But it's not simple and well-intentioned and just trying to get Israel to change certain behaviors. It ultimately is about trying to end Israel.
If I can add, and to first of all say, Congressman, thank you for all your efforts, not just within the committee, but on BDS and how it links up to the issue here of anti-Semitism. Our researchers at the Wiesenthal Center, I think, came up with, when you think about it, becomes obvious, but it's worth just stating it. Remember SodaStream? That was the first major global blowout. And when you heard the BDS proponents saying, oh, no, this is not about Israel. This is about the occupied territories and the fact that SodaStream has its factory in the occupied areas, and if they just move it, that'll be the end of the problem. When it was explained that there'd be 50 or 60 Palestinian families that no longer have a breadwinner, that Jews and Arabs had exactly the same monetary compensation, couldn't care less. Rule number one about BDS, they don't care about individual Palestinians. Secondly, the next step, not advertised, was now not about a particular spot in the Holy Land, but attacking all of Israel. There you can, I think, go to a certain ice cream brand that was utilized, but there were many other, you might say, more serious examples in which suddenly the state of Israel was demonized, trying to sort of put it into that 20th century South African slot of being a colonializer, an occupier. We know all of the lies. The third step has now then extended outside of Israel to Jews who supported Israel, to Zionists. And now we've landed in the fourth and final level, in which you have, just last Friday night, down the Wilshire Boulevard corridor, demonstrations, protests, following pretty much the narrative of Hamas, with spray paintings in an area that has synagogues and many Jews, especially Persian Jews, living there. So you've seen the evolution between starting out just about occupied territories to where we are today, yep, which is saying that BDS is a legitimizer of anti-Semitism on both sides of the Atlantic, and I commend you again for your efforts.
Thank you. In the short time I have left, Mr. Carr, I recently introduced the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which requires the Department of Education to use the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism and its contemporary examples. Can you speak about the importance of the IRA working definition and the importance of having governments adopt it in combating anti-Semitism, especially not just here in the United States, but in Europe and abroad.
Certainly, and actually, I thanked you in my opening remarks as well for your leadership on the IRA issue. Let me just very briefly say first about BDS that BDS is nothing other than the modern use of one of the oldest tactics in the book of anti-Semitism, which is denying economic intercourse to the Jewish community, the kind of economic activity that it needs to survive. It's war against Jews by other means, and BDS is the modern iteration of that. It's nothing other than nothing different than brown shirts standing in front of Jewish shops saying, "Don't buy from the Jews, kauft nicht bei Juden." That's what BDS is, and it's very important to recognize it for what it is. With regard to IRA, step one in confronting a threat is understanding the threat. And that means defining what anti-Semitism is. It's not enough to say, you know, I know it when I see it, although we often know it when we see it, but sometimes we don't. And having a definition that is a global standard and an authoritative reference point is deeply important because it allows all of us to discuss Jew hatred from the same playbook. The real power of the IRA definition is in the 11 examples that are including with it. And those examples not only capture traditional, you know, we might call it medieval anti-Semitism, you know, Jews responsible for all maladies in the world, or Jews exhibiting malevolent control over social institutions, but it also captures the so-called new anti-Semitism. And so one of the examples is denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, for example, by saying that the existence of a state of Israel is an anti-Semitic endeavor, or a racist endeavor. That's an example. Equating Israel to Nazi Germany is an example. Subjecting Israel to a double standard to which no other democracy is held is an example. Now, what does all this mean? It doesn't mean that we're censoring these things. That's very important. You know, those who don't want anti-Semitism defined will say, well, hold on a minute, there's free speech. Well, of course, there's free speech to call for all kinds of Jew hatred. We're not talking about censorship. The IRA definition is a tool of education. It's a tool of understanding. It's not a tool of censorship. And how can IRA be used? Well, it can be used in training so that, let's say, law enforcement officials understand how to recognize the anti-Semitic motivations underlying hate crimes. Very important. Even we've failed in that. There's an example where an FBI leader, after the Colleyville, Texas attack, said, well, we're not sure this is an anti-Semitic attack. They later walked that back. Why? He meant well. It wasn't an effort to sweep anti-Semitism under the rug. It was that this didn't neatly fit into one of the categories that they understood. The IRA definition would have been deeply important in immediately drawing and understanding that the Colleyville attack of a synagogue was an anti-Semitic attack. IRA is also a deeply important tool in education. Many of our states, as you know, require Holocaust education as a part of the annual curriculum. And we have now the Never Again Education Act that places federal priority on Holocaust education. Well, how can you teach about the Holocaust without talking about Jew hatred, the anti-Semitism that led to the Holocaust? And if you're going to teach about anti-Semitism, well, what are you going to teach? What are you going to say? How does it look like? How does it manifest? Well, guess what? We have a global definition that has now been accepted and adopted by over 1,200 entities in the world, including national governments, provincial and state governments, municipal governments, universities, sports teams, NGOs across the world that provides that reference point. So we have it. Let's employ it. Let's use it. Let's adopt it. I'll also point out, by the way, that the IRA definition is bipartisan in terms of our domestic use. It was used in the Obama administration. It was used in the Trump administration. It's being used in the Biden administration. And so it is global. It is bipartisan. And we should be using it because it can make a measurable difference in recognizing this evil.